And obviously, you know, in May, there'll be a new president there, and there'll be elections, and we'll work hopefully more cooperatively with whoever replaces the current president, but that's up to the people of Colombia. Did I not get your question? Go ahead.
Thank you. Returning to Gaza, what is the U.S. understanding of what Hamas is willing to concede on disarmament? Reports suggest that Hamas might hand over its heavy weapons but retain its smaller arms. Is the U.S. prepared to accept partial disarmament as sufficient?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into the details of those types of negotiations. Let me just couch it to you this way. Everyone wants peace. No one wants a return to a war. If Hamas is ever in a position in the future that they can threaten or attack Israel, you're not going to have peace. Okay? You're not going to convince anyone to invest money in Gaza if they believe another war is going to happen in 2 to 3 years. So I would just ask everyone to focus on what are the kind of weaponries and capabilities that Hamas would need in order to threaten or attack Israel as a baseline for what disarmament needs to look like. Because you're not going to have peace. If 2 years from now Hamas is launching rockets or killing Israelis or carrying out, God forbid, another 7th of October type terrorist attack and so forth, you're not going to have peace. So who's going to invest in a peace? Who's going to invest in rebuilding a place that's going to get destroyed again in a future war? So that's why disarmament is so critical. Now, what that entails, we're going to leave that to the technical teams to work on. It would have to be something, obviously, that they're willing to agree to, that our partners can push them and pressure them to agree to. It also has to be something that Israel agrees to. In order for that to work, both sides have to agree on it, and we need the space to do it. But that's the way to think about it, okay? You cannot have a Hamas that can threaten Israel in the future. If they can, you won't have peace. So that's the goal. All right. Who's left in that row? Right there with the mustache. Or the...
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Does the U.S. have the goal of removing Maduro from power? Do you expect any regime change this 2026? I would appreciate if you could answer both in English and in Spanish.
In Spanish?
Yeah.
It sounds so much better in Spanish when I answer that question.
No,
Okay.
but for my colleagues.
So I'll start in English. Look, our goal is regional stability and security in the national interest of the United States. The national interest of the United States, specifically when it comes to Venezuela, is as follows. We have a regime that's illegitimate, that cooperates with Iran, that cooperates with Hezbollah, that cooperates with narco-trafficking and narco-terrorist organizations, inclusive not just protecting their shipments and allowing them to operate with impunity, but also allows some of them to control territory, the ELN and the FARC-D. Okay? The ELN and the FARC dissidents operate openly. They have like open camps that they control territory inside of Venezuela. That is our national interest, and that is what this is focused on. And that's what the president's been focused on. And that's what we're conducting. And that's what we have been focused on the entire time, because that is the threat to the national interest of the United States. Now, do we consider Maduro legitimate? No. And by the way, guys, when I say these things about Maduro and his role in narco-trafficking, it's not, I hear as reports, Marco Rubio says it, it's not me. A grand jury in New York, in the Southern District of New York, okay, a grand jury in the Southern District of New York was presented evidence and came back with an indictment, not just against Maduro, by the way, but against a bunch of people in his government for narco-trafficking. A bunch. He had, his nephews or the nephews of his wife indicted, convicted in the United States for narco-trafficking. Like this was, until President Trump started doing something about these narco-trafficking links, nobody disputed that Maduro and his regime was in cahoots with narco-traffickers. Not to mention the fact that they unleashed Trinidad gangs on the United States. They've unleashed, a mass migration event, perhaps the largest in history. 8 million people have left Venezuela since 2014. So also destabilizing all the countries in the region who have had to assume people that are fleeing this illegitimate regime. So, but nobody disputed the drug links. So that's what the president's been focused on, and that's the problem. And that's the problem in Venezuela. En el caso de Venezuela es muy simple. Es un régimen ilegítimo que coopera abiertamente con Irán, con Hezbollah y con grupos narcotraficantes. Incluso la ELN y la FARC que operan abiertamente dentro del territorio venezolano encima de los demás. Entonces, la amenaza que enfrenta los Estados Unidos es eso, que tenemos un régimen ilegítimo que coopera abiertamente con elementos terroristas, y por eso consideramos el régimen de Maduro un régimen terrorista, cooperan abiertamente con elementos terroristas que amenazan la seguridad de Estados Unidos. Punto. Ese es nuestro interés y en eso estamos enfocados. Okay, next row right there. You, yeah.
With all due respect for my colleagues, I'm going to ask this one in Spanish.
Okay.
Señor secretario, usted acaba de decir que no espera o que no es la intención de Estados Unidos que las diferencias con el presidente Gustavo Petro generen afectaciones para para la relación con Colombia, pero la verdad es que sí las han generado. Colombia fue desertificada, el presidente Donald Trump ordenó suspensión de recursos de cooperación para nuestro país y ya se están viendo consecuencias en materia de seguridad en Colombia. Nada más anoche asesinaron a 6 soldados colombianos el ELN con un atentado terrorista. Y la gran pregunta en Colombia hoy es ¿qué va a pasar el próximo año si Colombia elige un presidente de izquierda? Si las relaciones de Estados Unidos, las buenas relaciones con Colombia y el respaldo de Estados Unidos va a depender de que el pueblo colombiano elija un presidente que sea visto con buenos ojos por parte de esta
No,
administración.
pero que esto no se trata de izquierda ni derecha, esto se trata de una persona que simplemente no coopera con nosotros en estos esfuerzos. De eso se trata. Al final del día, el pueblo colombiano va a escoger el próximo presidente. Es una democracia, tienen elecciones, esperemos que se cumplan todos los requisitos, tienen una larga historia de cumplir los requisitos democráticos. Aquí no estamos diciendo que Petro no fue electo democráticamente, aquí nadie dice que no fue así. Pero en fin, esto no se trata de izquierda ni derecha, se trata de tener en poder un presidente que coopera con nosotros. Obviamente, sin duda, la postura que era tomada en contra de Estados Unidos ha afectado a nuestra relación, no hay duda de eso ninguna. Estamos tratando de limitar eso lo más posible, pero también tenemos intereses que tenemos que proteger. Y tampoco podemos pretender, cuando tienes un presidente diciéndole a los elementos de seguridad que no cooperen con Estados Unidos, eso no lo podemos ignorar. Pero por otra parte, entendemos que tenemos dentro del sistema colombiano, incluso al nivel legislativo, en el Congreso, en el Senado, también alcaldes y otros líderes políticos de ese país que sí quieren buenas relaciones con Estados Unidos, y incluso líderes que no son de derecha, que son de izquierda, pero que entienden la importancia de esa relación. Pero esto no se trata de ni izquierda ni derecha, se trata que si va a cooperar con Estados Unidos o no. Tenemos una larga historial de cooperar con Colombia, que fue un ejemplo y un modelo para la región, y ahora tenemos algo un poco menos, que es lamentable. Ojalá que eso cambie. The question was about whether the U.S. relations to Colombia is dependent on whether they elect a leader that's center-right or center-left. It has nothing to do with left or right. It has to do very simply with whether or not we have a leader there that we can work with. The U.S.-Colombian relationship, especially our security relationship, but also our economic one with the free trade agreement, is a model. It was a model for the region. We tried to replicate that. Everybody would use Plan Colombia as an example of what you need to do in these other places. And we want to continue that. Now, no doubt, when you have the president of a country saying some of the things and ordering some of the things that he's ordered, it's going to have an impact on some of that relationship. Our job is to try to preserve and protect as much of that relationship as possible, but it will be impacted. But it doesn't matter whether the next president is center-right or center-left. That's not the issue. The issue is whether the next president is someone who's going to, once again, cooperate with the United States and restart these relations. That's what we seek. And if President Petro changes in his stance, perhaps that could change as well. But if he doesn't, obviously, it'll be up to the people of Colombia to elect their next president. Yes, ma'am, right there in the middle. I don't want you guys to think I'm only picking the Spanish ones, okay? I actually don't know who any, well, there's a list here, but I can't even read it without these glasses. All right, go ahead, I'm sorry, perdón.
Secretario Rubio, usted lleva años denunciando el régimen de Nicolás Maduro y estuvo, entiendo, hace poco en una conversación telefónica donde hablaron el presidente Trump y Nicolás Maduro. Quisiera preguntarle cómo sintió a Nicolás Maduro en esa conversación, usted que lo conoce desde hace años, pues su comportamiento, si siente que está acorralado como reportan los medios, si está abierto a irse a otro país a cambio de un indulto, si ustedes estarían pensando en reunirse con él. ¿Cómo fue esa conversación? O sea, ¿qué nos puede contar del efecto que está teniendo sobre la posición?
Yo no voy a comentar sobre ninguna conversación del presidente Trump con cualquiera del mundo, si existió o no existió. Yo no voy a comentar sobre eso. Voy a repetir lo que he dicho ya. Esto se trata de algo muy simple. Esto se trata de los intereses nacionales de Estados Unidos. Y hay una amenaza regional que existe. Y en el caso de Venezuela no tenemos cooperación. Para empezar, que es un régimen ilegítimo. Segundo, que es un régimen que no coopera, es antiamericano en todos sus pronunciamientos y actuaciones. Y tercero, es un régimen que no solamente no coopera con nosotros, sino abiertamente coopera con elementos peligrosos, terroristas y criminales. Incluso ellos mismos lo son. Entonces es difícil llegar a un acuerdo con terroristas que están abiertamente cooperando con estos elementos peligrosos que amenazan la seguridad de Estados Unidos. Encima de eso no voy a especular más.
Pero va a haber guerra, secretario, porque ahorita en Colombia todo el mundo se está levantando, en Venezuela, con la posibilidad de que haya una guerra entre Estados Unidos y Colombia.
Nosotros estamos protegiendo el interés nacional de Estados Unidos. Yo creo que, en fin, ese es nuestro derecho. Y también le diré que en Colombia debe haber mucha preocupación, que ha habido un ataque el día antes de ayer, o fue ayer, de ELN, o la FARC, creo que fue ELN, y ¿de dónde operan ellos? Abiertamente, de territorio venezolano, abiertamente, como si fueran un país soberano, operando abiertamente dentro del territorio venezolano. It's the same question, guys, and that is, the bottom line is very simple. Our interest in Venezuela and in the region is the national interest of the United States. And in Venezuela, we have an illegitimate regime that not only does not cooperate with the United States, but openly cooperates with narco-terrorists and others who threaten the national security of our country. The gentleman in the middle. I'm going to try to get to everybody, I promise. But you guys, by then, your questions will be
Thank you,
more
Mr. Secretary.
specific.
You said a few moments ago that everyone wants peace for Gaza, and yet by any metric, the Israelis are flouting the ceasefire that President Trump negotiated by killing an average of 2 children a day, not allowing the agreed-upon humanitarian aid into Gaza. How long can this continue? How long can the Israelis be allowed to show such disrespect to President Trump?
Well, look, that's your characterization of it about the term disrespect. What I would say is this. This was, first of all, it was a miracle that it happened in the first place. We all understand how difficult it was for that to come to the conclusion that it did, where the bombing and everything else, the scale and scope of what we saw ended, all the hostages were released, and we have relative peace right now for the most part, despite the things you're pointing to. That was very difficult. But this is not easy. Peace is a verb. It's an action. It's not a sentiment. Every single day will bring challenges. Every single day. We also have had instances, for example, over the last couple of weeks, where Hamas elements emerged from a tunnel, attached an explosive device to the side of a vehicle, and injured and almost killed Israeli soldiers. We still have this threat. We still have and see every single day Hamas openly taking steps to strengthen themselves within inside of those places in Gaza that they still control. We saw early on the atrocities they were committing in the streets against people as they were trying to show people how strong they were. So I don't think I'm standing here to tell you this is going to be easy. This is an hour-by-hour, day-by-day challenge. It's one of the reasons why we have stood up this center there in operating in Israel, in partnership as well with another cell that exists in a regional country. It's why every single day there are meetings among both intelligence, diplomatic, and military officials of multiple countries that help bring about this deal to manage this. And that's why it is so critical. It is so critical and so key that we move to complete this first phase, that we move to put in place the board of peace, get everybody agree to be a part of it, move to put in place this Palestinian technocratic organization so that they can begin to provide some governance structure, and move to put in place the stabilization force. That's the goal here, but it's not going to be easy. Every day will bring new challenges to that, and we recognize those challenges are coming from all sides.
Very quick follow-up there, but who's going to want to be a part of a stabilization force if Israel is effectively using Gaza as a free fire zone?
Well, these are the things these are the things that we're working through right now. That's why it didn't happen yesterday. That's why we didn't, I don't mean yesterday literally, that means why we're not there yet. This is the hard work of diplomacy and peacemaking. Peacemaking isn't just signing a piece of paper, it's actually complying with it. And compliance oftentimes requires, in many cases, in most cases, requires daily, constant follow-up and nurturing. So that is why we are in such a hurry, and I say as a priority, to get to this point where we have the stabilization force in place, overseen by the Board of Peace, and ultimately a Palestinian technocratic entity that can increase in its capability to provide governance. The stronger they are, the weaker Hamas will be in terms of threatening Israel. And I think the more security Israel should feel and the less need for some of these things to happen. But no one's claiming this is going to be easy. We have to work on this every single day. We have people in this building and deployed abroad. This is all they do. 24 hours a day, day after day, elements of the State Department, the Department of War, and all other agencies, including Jared and Steve and even myself, who talk or do something about. There isn't a day in the last, this was signed 2 months ago, that I haven't had to do something with regards to making progress on the phases of this ceasefire. Yes, ma'am. Right next.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm sorry.
Secretary.
I'm going to get to you guys. I'm coming. See him going down the rows like this.
Thank you.
So right behind you, 'cause I'm still in that row.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for having the
Has
briefing.
anyone ever done this where they go like all the
No.
rows?
No.
You're going to look so good to your editors. All right, go ahead.
Caroline Lumetta with World News Group. Several faith-based organizations have been calling on the administration to reopen the U.S. refugee admissions program, particularly for religious minorities facing persecution. That includes Afghanistan, Syria, Iran. Is it going to be a goal in 2026 to expand that program again beyond South Afrikaners?
Yeah, so here's the problem, okay? In the last 4 years, we had a flood of people enter this country through a variety of means. So that's what we confronted. We have to stop that, and we did. We've been successful. You see the border secured, the number of illegal entries has completely collapsed. And now we're facing a second challenge, and that is we've admitted a lot of people into the United States. And perhaps the overwhelming majority of them are not bad people and so forth. This is all true. But there are people, we know, okay, for a fact, that there are people in this country who got in through some form of vetting that was wholly insufficient. And we've seen tragic evidence of that very recently, including people that we claim to have vetted. So, why does that happen? Because there are some places where you can't vet people. You can only vet people on the basis of information you have about them. But that information is oftentimes dependent on whether there's some local authority that actually has any information about them. Okay, so that is the challenge we're facing, which is why the president has sort of put a stop to all of these things until these systems for admitting people into our country can be improved. But I think everyone would understand that after a flood of 15 to 20 million people into our country, almost unrestrained in some extent, over the last 4 years before taking over in January of this year, there's a desire in our country to put a stop to that until we can fix these processes to ensure that not only do we know who's in the country now, but in the future, we're not going to face some of these challenges that we faced in the past. So, look, the United States remains the most generous country in the world when it comes to legal immigration. This year alone, close to 1 million people will enter this country legally and have their green card and go to war. But we do have a right, like every sovereign country does, to know who you are, why you're coming, what you've done in the past, and what we think you might or might not do in the future. We have a right. We have a right to make sure that you're not going to come to this country and pose a burden on our social safety network. All of these things are rights of sovereign countries. A bunch of sovereign countries in the world do it. Most of the countries in the world have far more restrictive immigration policies than the United States has ever had. But we are in a special period right now. This is not like business as usual. This is, right now, we are less than a year removed from the most reckless migratory incompetence in American history, where a flood of people and mass migration events entered the United States. And they can claim all they want that they vetted people. This is just not true. Some of them were cursory vetting, and in some cases, you couldn't vet them, because the countries or places they came from had no documents upon which they could be vetted on. So that program will be studied, and it will not be restarted at the scale and scope it was until we are comfortable that it is one that we know everyone who's coming in and who they are and whether they meet the criteria for admission to the United States.
But do you
Yes,
have
ma'am.
any sort of
Thank you
timeline
so
for
much,
that?
Mr. Secretary. A follow-up on the conversation between President Trump and Maduro, because the day after the conversation, the president said he was going to be meeting that gentleman very soon. Is this still being considered? Is the president still considering that? Is still a chance for diplomacy on Venezuela? And also, any role that you see Brazil could play? Because just a few weeks ago, President Lula spoke with President Trump and Nicolás Maduro, and he offered to help to mediate the conversation.
Yeah, I'm not going to
And,
comment on any, as I said, I'm not going to comment on the president's talks. I will just point you to the fact that the thing about this president that I think you've seen is he's willing to talk to anybody. He doesn't view talks as a concession. But I don't have any update to you on what comes next in that regard. I have no reason to express skepticism or optimism about it. I'm just not going to comment on what the president has available to him as options across the range of options that include diplomatic options.
And how about the conversation with Lula?
I mean, I think he said to us what he has said publicly, and that he has a willing to play a positive role in that regard. You know, the president's had 2 phone conversations and 1 meeting with President Lula. I think we've made progress on some things, including on trade. We have more work to be done. The 2 presidents got along. We felt that was important in terms of those conversations. I've talked to Mauro, their foreign minister, on it, including this earlier this week. And we have a lot of issues in common with Brazil that we'd like to work together on, and strong links. Being from Florida, as an example, I know how important Brazil has been to us as a partner. We've had some disagreements on a couple things over the years as well. But I feel like that relationship is on a positive trajectory. But as far as its role in Venezuela, I don't have anything to provide you on that today of any specificity.
Just a
Yes,
quick
sir.
follow-up on
Thank
the
you.
tariffs, political tariffs
No,
on
I got to
Brazil.
get to him.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you very much for doing this. On phase 2 in Gaza, when is the soonest that we could see that being implemented? And then separately, you said at the top that you want the US to play the role of mediator that brings about the avoidance of war and ending conflicts. How do you square that position with a possible military intervention in Venezuela? Thank you.
Well, first of all, a couple things. Wanting to pursue peace and secure peace does not necessarily come at the expense of your national interest. We reserve the right and retain the option of defending our national interest. Now, in the case, again, we're going to talk about Venezuela. Let's be clear. Maduro has made multiple deals with elements around the world, including with the Biden administration. Okay, Maduro made a deal with the Biden administration, and here's the deal he made. And I only say this to you not because we want to get back to that deal, but just as an example of why the guy cannot be trusted to keep deals. It's a problem. Okay, somebody breaks deals multiple times, you have a right to be skeptical they're ever going to keep the deal. He made a deal, and as part of that deal, they lifted sanctions. They released his 2 nephews from federal custody after their conviction. They sent back his bagman, Alex Saab, and all these sorts of things. He released political prisoners, and he promised to have free and fair elections. He didn't have free and fair elections. He rearrested or exiled most of those political prisoners, so he pocketed all the benefits and lived to none of those commitments. So, look, it's hard to have and do a deal with someone who never keeps a deal. Now, on the broader perspective of what you're asking about, let's be mature here. Yes, there are issues where we want to pursue peace if that is possible, but we also have our national interest. If our national, we're not going to reach a peace deal with narco trafficking bans. We're not. We can't reach a peace deal with MS-13. We can't reach a peace deal with Tren de Aragua. We can't reach a peace deal with the ELN or the FARC that are still pumping drugs into the United States or any of their cartels in Mexico. You can't do a peace deal with these people any more than you could do a peace deal with a mafia. So I think it's important to understand that's different between warring factions and nation states around the world where we feel like maybe we could act as a bridge to bringing about the differences. But when you're talking about things that directly implicate the national interest of the United States, and no one can argue that transnational criminality and terrorism in our hemisphere is not a threat to the national interest of the United States, we have to we reserve the right and have the right to utilize every element of national power to defend the national interest of the United States. And no one can dispute that. And every country in the world reserves the same option. We just simply have more power than some of them do.
And phase 2 Gaza?
Oh, phase 2 Gaza, yeah. I mean, we got to complete phase 1 to get to phase 2. That's why we're working every day to get there. Look, guys, if this stuff was easy, it would have been done already a long time ago. This is a complex situation. No one would dispute it, but it's important. What we achieved already, what the president achieved ending that war already was something no one thought was possible. Everyone thought that the last episode was going to be an Israeli incursion into Gaza City that would lead to massive loss of life and the hostages would never be reunited with their families. And today, as we speak, all the hostages that were living are back, all but I believe one of the bodies has been returned. No one would have believed that 6 months ago. So that in and of itself, but that is not the end of the story. We want to continue on this. But what we're talking about is dealing with something that no one has been able to solve in 30 or 40 years. No one. And it's going to take some time. But I feel generally optimistic that we have the right people at the table with the right motivations to make it happen. But no one is claiming to you that this is going to be just a straight up trajectory. It's going to have its ups and downs. It's going to have its good days and bad days. The important point is that the momentum and the trajectory on it is a positive trajectory. And we're investing high levels of our government every day in trying to make that happen. But we can't do it alone. We have all these other partners that we have to include. So I would focus you on, let's get the board of peace in place and announced. Let's get the technocratic Palestinian group in place. And then let's get the stabilization force in place. And then we can move on to the other elements, the phase 2 and phase 3 of the plan, that hopefully will be what will be enduring. And the work of putting phase 2 and phase 3 in place is going to extend far beyond the next 3 years. I mean, this is a generational commitment. But we want to leave those pieces in place for the next administration to continue to build upon, even as we achieve phase 1 and parts of phase 2 during this administration. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary, some of your former Democratic former Senate colleagues who considered you one of their most trusted bipartisan partners have, since you joined the Trump administration, accused you of abandoning some of your former principles and positions. And 3 or 4 have said they regret voting for you.
I had 99 votes. I could have spared 4.
What's your response to that? And more importantly, how do you think about building and maintaining bipartisan consensus and cooperation on foreign policy at this moment, especially because that will be necessary to sustain President Trump's legacy after he leaves office?
I mean, we live in a very different time, unfortunately. I engage with senators, for example, from both parties. Just saw a bunch of them the other day all the time. And obviously, but politics today is very different than it was 10 or 20 years ago. It just is. I'm not in that anymore. I'm no longer in a political office, but I know political offices. I served 14 years in the Senate, and politics is real, right? I mean, there's also not a lot of benefit to a Democratic senator saying what a great guy Marco Rubio is in this current political environment, or anyone in the Trump administration for that matter. So all I will tell you is I get up every day, we go to work, we get work done, we do cooperate and work with. They don't always agree with everything we're doing, but I have a lot of people in the Senate, particularly chairmen of key committees that we interact with. There's things people can say and do in the public that because of politics, in private, that they can't say or do in public. But I don't know what else to comment on that other than one more point, and that is, I think this is important. I think people have lost sort of their mindset here a little bit, okay? The foreign policy, the State Department is not its own government, okay? The Secretary of State is not its own government. I'm appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and then, or nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and then appointed by the president. But at the end of the day, the person the people of the United States elected to be the president of the United States and the commander-in-chief is Donald J. Trump. That's who they elected. And my job, and the job of the people in our administration, is to implement the president's foreign policy. We provide advice, we provide counsel, but ultimately our job is to take what the president wants to do, take his vision, and implement it. Come up with options for implementing the president's vision. That's my job today. When I was a senator, I represented the state of Florida. Today, I am the Secretary of State for Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States, and my job is to implement the President's foreign policy, provide advice, provide counsel, provide ideas, provide for opportunities and ways in which his foreign policy can be implemented. But in the end, our job is to implement that. And why people think that somehow foreign policy can be divorced from our republic? That's not the way our Constitution works. The Constitution does not say you elect the President of the United States and then you put in place a State Department to undermine the President if the person who's the Secretary of State doesn't agree with him. That's ridiculous. That's stupid, really. And I don't know why anybody would think that. So that's the job I have, and that's the job I'm proud to do. I think we've made a lot of progress. We have a lot more work to do. All right, on our row right there from Italy, right? I know you from the...
Yes.
Do you cover us now, or are you on Capitol Hill still?
No, everything.
Both. So
Capitol
you're like a
Hill
one-man
and
bureau for the
as
whole
well
thing.
as
All right.
here.
You're like me. You have two
Secretary.
jobs. Good.
Yeah. All right, thank you, Mr. Secretary. So the United States, on one hand, are mediating with Russia to end the war in Ukraine, but on the other hand, the Russian foreign minister yesterday or the day before said it would be a fatal mistake from the U.S. To block the oil tanks from Venezuela and trying to overthrow the Maduro regime. So, what kind of what's the assess that you're doing, and are there any safeguards in place to avoid escalation with Russia? And then I have another question about the Hezbollah, sir.
Yeah, we're not concerned about an escalation with Russia with regards to Venezuela. We've always expected them to provide rhetorical support for the Maduro regime. I think they have their hands full in Ukraine. And if he's watching, Sergei, Merry Christmas. But at the end of the day, I expected them to say what they were going to say. The rhetorical support, we understand what that's at. It's not a factor in how we consider this whole thing.
And then, if I may, about the Hezbollah, I know you already answered, but I wanted to ask you if the U.S. administration is considering a broader military support involving also potential Arab partners, not only in providing weapons, but also going into the field to disarm the Hezbollah if the diplomatic talks will fail.
Well, I've not heard anyone sort of suggest that at the level of detail that you've talked about. I think regionally, for example, if you talk to the Syrian authorities, they're very concerned about Hezbollah. I think most of the countries in the Gulf region view Hezbollah as an agent of Iranian influence and Iranian action. But as far as what you're discussing, which is sort of a coalition of armed units going into Lebanon to disarm Hezbollah, I've not heard that proposed by anybody. Perhaps you have, but I haven't, and that's not certainly something we've been...
Senator Graham
okay.
was talking about
Lindsey,
this
one
at
of
the
my former
Congress.
colleagues,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, you should ask Lindsey about how he's going to put that together, because, but we just haven't heard it. I'm not saying you may not hear that one day in the future, but I think what is clear, and I think maybe perhaps what Lindsey is speaking to, is that it is clear that if you talk to leaders in the region in all these countries, they all have the same goal, perhaps not, which is to ensure that Hezbollah can no longer play the role that they've played in the past, not just threatening Israel, but being an agent, an open agent, really a proxy of Iranian influence in the region.
Thank you.
Next. I didn't get to you. Oh, I'm in the new row. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. You have previously said in the past that you and the administration are committed to fixing the backlog of visas for foreign-born priests and other religious workers, whether that be through the Religious Workforce Act, or through maybe a standalone process. Is there any update you can give on the status of that and what's being done to
Yeah, I think we'll
hopefully
have more
fix
to
this
announce
issue?
on that early next month. Yeah, early next month.
Okay.
We've worked closely with a lot of the religious authorities to do that. Obviously, depending on the denomination, we're not discriminating in favor of one versus another.
Mm-hmm.
Some denominations are more professionalized in terms of what they're able to provide us with and sort of information versus others. Some of it depends the country they're coming from, because, we have to be careful not to be waiving, we have country-specific requirements depending on the country they're coming from. But I think we have a good plan in place to put that into effect. And I know we've worked with a number of denominations in that process. Obviously, one of the big users of that system is the Catholic Church in the U.S. And so we've worked with the Conference of Bishops, and I think we're going to get to a good place. We don't have it ready yet. All this takes time to put together, but we're moving quickly, and I think we'll have something positive about that at some point next month, hopefully in the early part of next month.
Thank you
Yes,
so
sir.
much.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles said that the U.S. would need congressional approval to conduct ground strikes in Venezuela. Do you share that view? And on your response today on regime change, Wiles already acknowledged that the point of the boat strikes was to pressure Maduro, i.e. have him leave. Why not just acknowledge that this is a regime change?
Do you have the quote she said?
That this is
No, but do you have the quote?
to cry uncle. I
Yeah,
believe
so,
is the
okay,
quote.
so cry uncle, all right? I guess in Spanish you would have to say tío. But I think, I don't know how that, I mean, you can interpret any way you want. But at the end of the day, it is clear that the current status quo with the Venezuelan regime is intolerable for the United States. The status quo, that they operate and cooperate with terrorist organizations against the national interest of the United States. Not just cooperate, but partner with and participate in activities that threaten the national interest of the United States. So yes, our goal is to change that dynamic. And that's why the president's doing what he's doing. Change that dynamic by ensuring that no one wants to get on drug boats anymore. You know, people were just going out there, you know, openly without any fear of the reaper. And now I think people understand, like, it's not a good idea. By the way, we haven't had a strike in the Caribbean basin in almost 5 weeks. Do you know why? It's not because we stopped looking. It's because no one wants to get on a boat anymore and do that. So it's been effective at cutting that down. Now there's been strikes in the Pacific. So the bottom line is that, sure, our goal is to, I mean, what's the point of doing something else? But the change, people want to focus on regime this and this and that. The goal here is very simple. The national interest of the United States. The President of the United States was elected to protect the American people, to protect America. That's what he was elected to do. It's one of his fundamental promises that Donald J. Trump made when he was elected President of the United States is, I am going to protect this country. Protect us from what? From the threat of terrorism, from threats to our economy, and from threats these drug organizations and these terrorist organizations pose against the United States. And if you are an ally, a friend, a partner, or cooperate or participate in activities that threaten the United States, you're going to have a problem with President Trump. I think the only shocking thing here is that a lot of people say that. People run all the time for office. I'm going to take on the cartels. I'm going to do this. He's actually doing it. He's not doing anything he didn't say he was not going to do during this campaign. He said he was going to go after the cartels. And now he's going after the cartels, and everybody's shocked. Don't be shocked. This is a man who was elected president because he says and then he does. He doesn't just say and then forget about it.
And congressional approval on land strikes, do you think that the United States does need to go to Congress in order to conduct land strikes in Venezuela?
Well, look, I'm not going to speculate about things that you know, haven't happened and may never happen. I'm not going to speculate on that. All I'm going to tell you is that, two things. And I remind Congress all the time. By the way, I was very consistent on this position because it was my position when I was in the Senate. Number one, no administration, Republican or Democrat, has ever accepted the War Powers Act as being constitutional. That said, multiple administrations, including this one, have sought congressional approval and or certainly congressional notification of actions taken. Why? Because American action is always strongest when it has the buy-in and the participation of a broad set of actors. Now, given our current political climate, that's not always easy because we do have people today in politics that are against everything that President Trump is for. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if they themselves had the same position. If it's President Trump's idea, they're against it reflexively. Okay? That's the nature of the current climate in our politics. But I can tell you that to this point, nothing has happened that requires us to notify Congress or get congressional approval or cross the threshold into war. We have very strong legal opinions. We have now briefed Capitol Hill 23 times, 23 briefings, bipartisan briefings on Capitol Hill. I have personally participated in 6 of those 23 at the highest levels of the committee, but then the full House and then the full Senate, which, by the way, are always interesting. Now, okay, get it. I've been there before, okay? So I was part of this thing in the past as well. But you do this briefing, you answer all their questions, and then they go out and tell people, we heard nothing, we saw nothing, that we were pleased with. They already had their answer before they went in, but we do them anyways. And we continue to do them. Not to mention the individual calls I've had with leaders in Congress, and I'm not going to disclose what those are. So everybody over there knows what we're doing, they know why we're doing it, and we've kept Congress fully apprised, and we'll continue to do so. Yes?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The settlers' violence is rampant in the West Bank.
The what is, I'm sorry?
The settlers,
yes,
the Israeli
okay,
settlers' violence in the West Bank is being escalating, is increasing. Also, Israel is building around 20 settlements unit. Doesn't this undermine your own effort in the peace process? And also, if I may, on Gaza, the humanitarian situation is dire. The babies have been frozen to death because of the weather. Tents have been flooded. Is this anything the United States can do to alleviate the suffering of the civilians in Gaza?
Yeah. In the case of the West Bank, we have, and you've seen our embassy even has put out statements and comments about specific incidents there that we're concerned about, that we do think, create a point of strong friction in the broader effort. And our own embassy, and Ambassador Huckabee has spoken to this as recently as a couple weeks ago, very firmly, I believe. And so we'll continue to communicate that as we have and make our opinion known in regards to its impact on the broader challenges. In the case of humanitarian, absolutely. I mean, this is the reason why that group is set up there every single day. We've been successful at opening new corridors. We want to continue to see that increase. We want to continue to see the flow of aid increase into those parts of Gaza that are still under Hamas control. But it also goes back, not to sound like a broken record, to why it is so critical to have the border peace put in place and the Palestinian technocratic group put in place. Because that allows us now, when you have this technocratic Palestinian group in place and a stabilization force to provide security, it now allows us to have someone we can work with to turn over the humanitarian aid to and have them be the ones that help distribute it along with these international partners. That's what the point we're trying to get to, that we can get to a point where that is, and part of the thing with humanitarian aid is also security. Someone has to provide security for these convoys as they go in, because oftentimes they have been attacked, they've been looted, they've been so forth. We don't have a force that can do that right now unless the Israelis are going to go in, and that would violate the ceasefire. But if we have a stabilization force on the ground, they could provide security. And then the technical side of it, the logistical side of it, along with the international partners, is what the Palestinian Technocratic Organization can do. That is why we are in such a hurry to finalize that phase of this deal so that the aid can flow. And not just aid, then we can move from aid to reconstruction, which is the goal everybody has. You want to reach a point in which you're not providing aid because Gaza has an economy, and it's not an economy controlled by Hamas. But we can't get to that stage until we can secure the place. And that's why we're in such a hurry to finalize that phase of the deal. Yes, sir.
Vladimir Putin today
I thought you were introducing yourself.
No, no.
I'm Vladimir
Definitely
Putin.
not. Definitely not. Vladimir
So what
Putin.
are you doing here?
Nick Schiffer in PBS NewsHour. Vladimir Putin had his own end-of-year press conference today.
Oh, he's trying to step on my message.
Yeah. His went, I think, 4 hours, so we got,
well,
we
don't
got at
worry
least
about
3
that.
hours. And he said he was willing to end the war in
I
Ukraine.
bet you he didn't do it in Spanish.
He did not.
All right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. He said he was willing to end the war in Ukraine based on principles he had outlined last summer, and that included a complete Ukrainian withdrawal from 4 regions, most of which are not occupied by Russia, recognition of occupied Russian territory in Ukraine, and the complete lifting of sanctions. That goes beyond some of the recent conversations you've been having. So do you think Putin is serious about peace, and is the U.S. willing to recognize occupied Russian territory in Ukraine?
Look, I think ultimately there is what people say, and I'm not claiming that that's not his position. I'm just saying there's what people say and then what people do. In the end, we're not going to base our approach to finding peace here on the basis simply of what people are saying. We're going to base it on what people are willing to agree to, what countries are willing to agree to. Our role is very simple. We try to understand what the Russian position, how much can they give and what do they have to have. We understand the Ukrainian position, and we try to find whether those two things can overlap. Maybe that happens this week. Maybe that happens next month. Maybe that's not ready for a few months. That's not up to us. That's up to the two sides. In the end, it's up to them to make a deal. We can't force Ukraine to make a deal. We can't force Russia to make a deal. They have to want to make a deal. The role we're trying to play is a role of figuring out whether there's any overlap here that they can agree to. And that's what we've invested a lot of time and energy and continue to do so. That may not be possible. I hope it is. I hope it can get done this month before the end of the year. I want it to end as soon as possible. I know the president is deeply committed to helping it end. I know this, though. We're the only ones that can do it. If we were not involved, no one would be talking to both sides. The UN can't do it. But who else is going to do it? Nobody in Europe can do it. So I think the one thing people should have is an expression of gratitude that President Trump is willing to continue to engage in this despite the fact that we haven't yet gotten the outcome that he hopes to have, because no one else could do it. And so that's what we're trying to do here. So this whole narrative that we're trying to force something on Ukraine is silly. We can't there's no peace deal that Ukraine, there is no peace deal unless Ukraine agrees to it. But there's also no peace deal unless Russia agrees to it. We are just trying to find whether there's common ground that we can make happen. And maybe that's not possible. Maybe it is. Maybe that's not possible right now. But we don't think our work could potentially serve as a baseline for that in the future. Maybe it is possible now. we're going to continue to test it and see where we can get to.
Is the U.S. willing to recognize occupied territory?
I'm not going to speak on any specifics of any deal because we're not going to be able to negotiate a peace deal, especially one like this, in the media. Suffice it to say, let me just put it to you this way. There can't be a peace deal unless Ukraine agrees to it. And there can't be a peace deal, of course, unless Russia agrees to it. But remember that. Any peace deal is one that Ukraine has to agree to because they're a combatant. If Ukraine says we don't agree to it, there won't be peace. So our job is not to force anything on anyone. It is to try to figure out if we can nudge both sides to a common place. And guys, you know, in a conflict like this, in a war like this, that's not easy. It takes a lot of time. We're going to have some patience with it, unfortunately. It's already gone longer. But understand why the president cares about this, okay? Because let's be honest here, and I'm not trying to diminish this, okay? Because it's an interesting position to be in. The United States only provides, we don't provide weapons to Russia. We only provide weapons to Ukraine. The United States doesn't sanction Ukraine. It's only sanctioned Russia. And yet we are still the only country in the world that can talk to both sides. So let's be clear about the role we've played in this so far. I mean, we're the only ones that can. But, so I don't mean to be dismissive of why this matters or it's important, because this is going on in another continent. We've got issues in our own hemisphere we need to be dealing with. That if you were to ask prioritization, I would argue that something in our hemisphere from our national interest is more important than something in another continent. But it doesn't make Ukraine and Russia unimportant. We care about it. That's why we're involved in it. But by the same token, why does the president care? I'll tell you why. This week, 9,000 people will die, including like 5,000 or 6,000 weekly Russian casualties, okay, in a war. This is a bloody, nasty conflict. In the same time, the entire electric grid, the entire infrastructure of Ukraine is being destroyed almost as fast as it's being rebuilt. Every week that goes by, the cost of rebuilding that country gets exponentially higher. It is now becoming generational reconstruction. This is a very damaging war that's going to have incredible implications. There are now hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, probably maybe in millions, who have not lived in Ukraine in years. They've been displaced to other countries. The implications of this long-term for Ukraine are dramatic, and for Russia too, but for Ukraine, if we're focused on them. This is why the president wants to end it. He thinks it's a bloody, nasty, horrifying war, and he doesn't like wars. He really doesn't like wars. He thinks they're a waste of money, time, and talent. And he wants this one to end. And we're doing everything we can to end it. And it may or may not be possible, but we're certainly going to keep trying. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I promise you we're going to go through here. Do you have a deadline or something? I know, but let me get to the roads, because if I break up the road thing, you're going to screw up the whole plan I have for today. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. If I can turn internally for a moment, a recent survey by the American Foreign Service Association found strikingly low morale among career diplomats in the U.S., some of whom reported that they feel like they can't freely express their opinions, that their candidate input is not welcome, and many of them are saying that they're actually thinking about career changes. I know you talked at the top about how change can be disruptive, but I wonder, how much does this concern you? Do you possibly see this as a feature, not a bug, or would you be happy to see people leave so that you can bring in a new crop of people? And then just briefly on your own role, you have 2 jobs right now. Your travel schedule seems a bit lighter than your recent predecessors. You didn't attend the last NATO foreign ministers gathering and had your deputy go. Are you fully performing the job of Secretary of State? Are you more of a national security advisor than a Secretary of State? Can you talk about that?
Well, first of all, on the travel schedule, we have a lot of leaders keep coming here, too. So you talk about NATO, great example on NATO. I already went to a NATO meeting this year of all the foreign ministers. Then I went to the leaders meeting, which not all the foreign ministers were at. And then on top of that, that week is the week we had Rwanda and the DRC coming to the United States on a deal that I was working in. So as far as the travel schedule is concerned, we have a lot of leaders constantly coming here. We have leader meetings every single week for the most part up until last week. So there's a lot of work to be done. On the Foreign Service, we have very talented people here. I saw that report somewhere. That's from the union. It's from a union survey. All I can tell you is that today Foreign Service officers are more empowered at the regional bureau than they've ever been. I get descent cables. I get cables every day from all over the world that provide the baseline for a lot of the ideas that we pursue. There isn't a week that goes by that I don't send back 2 or 3 cables with notes about, let's turn this into a policy proposal. We are changing this place so that it is our missions in the field that are not just driving directives from the top down, but also ideas from the bottom up. And I'm very proud of that, and I think that's going to lead and pay huge dividends for future secretaries of state long after I'm gone. So, yes, sir.
Thank you, Secretary. Human rights organizations report that 2025 has seen the highest number of executions in the Islamic Republic of Iran. in over 2 decades. What specific new measures is the State Department taking to ensure that human rights abuses, specifically this surge of state-sanctioned execution, do not become a secondary priority in your dealings with Tehran?
Well, ultimately, look, we have very deep and systemic disagreements with the regime in Iran. And it's part of one of, if not the most sanctioned country in the world, one of the most sanctioned countries in the world. There isn't a week that goes by, or at least 2-3 times a month, I'm authorizing some new sanction on some new entity related to Iran. I don't think anyone could argue that this administration has been friendly towards them. So we continue to feature these things because it tells us about who they are. In the case of some of these executions that you're talking about, some of them, by the way, were in the aftermath of the war with Israel, where they went through and have jailed people and accused people of being informants and spies and things of that nature. But we're under no illusion, and every year we put out a report that outlines this, and we've been pretty consistent in our messaging. Our problem with the Iranian regime isn't simply, obviously it's predominantly their desire to acquire nuclear weapons, their sponsorship of terrorism, but it's ultimately the treatment of their own people. I said it in my hearing a year ago in the Senate, I say it now, I know of no nation on earth where there is such a difference between a regime that governs the country and the people who live there every single day. That regime is not reflective of the people who live in Iran, who are the inheritors of a proud and long cultural legacy and a proud history. And then you've got a clerical radical regime that has driven and taken the wealth of that country and used it not to enrich secure their people and their future, not to make sure they have enough water and electricity. They've used their money to sponsor terrorist organizations all over the world. That's what they've used their money for. So we're going to continue to consistently point that out.
Secretary,
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I got to go because I'm getting everybody today.
Regarding Europe, you said that Europe was not going to be able to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. There's been some disengagement. There's some push within the European Union to either not comply with the increase in defense spending that the United States has been promoting, or also some European countries like Spain promoting closer ties to China, or going to China, or inviting more investment from China, or even Chinese technology in critical infrastructure. Are you concerned at all about this path?
No, the countries made a commitment in NATO at a meeting I was at, where they made the 5% pledge, which is a dramatic